The moment my husband's business partner opened the door to that rooftop launch party and saw me standing there with two county marshals behind me, I watched the champagne flute slip right out of his hand. It shattered on the concrete floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. My husband was standing at the far end of the terrace, backlit by the downtown Seattle skyline, mid-law, with a group of men in expensive jackets. He had a glass of something amber in one hand, and his other arm was draped loosely around her shoulder. The woman I was not supposed to know about. The woman he had used my 540,000 duas to impress. He turned at the sound of breaking glass. His laugh died so completely and so instantly that it was almost surgical. For exactly 1 second he looked like himself, confident, smug, already calculating what lie would work best in the next 30 seconds. Then he saw the marshals. I had driven past this building 4 times in the 2 weeks since I found out about the party. Not because I was struggling to let go, because I was making sure I had the parking structure mapped correctly. Because when you are about to do something this precise, you do not want to be circling the block. I want to back up. Because the version of me standing in that doorway did not appear overnight. She was built slowly, out of paperwork and silence and a very specific kind of grief that does not announce itself. My husband and I met when I was 26. He was 31, finishing a fellowship in architecture, and he had this way of talking about buildings like they were living things. Like a well-designed space could actually heal people. I fell in love with the idea as much as I fell in love with him. We got married the following spring in my grandmother's backyard in Portland. Small ceremony, tulips everywhere. I wore my mother's earrings. 3 years in, he came to me with the plan. He wanted to open his own design studio, not a franchise, not a partnership with a larger firm, his own name on the door. He had the talent, he had the vision. What he did not have was capital. I did. My grandmother had left me a trust when she passed. It was not family fortune money. It was the result of a woman who had worked as a seamstress for 40 years, invested carefully, lived modestly, and loved me enough to think about my future from the time I was 7 years old. That money was the most sacred thing I owned. I gave him 400,000 to start. Another 140 over the following 18 months as the studio grew. I signed the paperwork, co-signed the lease on the studio space, and then I went back to my own job in urban planning, and I stopped asking questions. Because I trusted him. Because that is what you do when you love someone. The studio did well enough that he started talking about expansion, a proper public launch, a rebrand. An invitation-only event for clients, investors, and press to celebrate the studio's 3rd anniversary and the unveiling of their first major civic project, a performing arts center commission worth more than $2 million. I assumed I would be there. I assumed it the way you assume your name is still on the door. I found out I was not invited from his mother. Not intentionally. She called me one afternoon while I was driving home from work, chattering about what she was planning to wear to the event. She mentioned the guest list. She mentioned the woman who had been helping him coordinate the evening. She mentioned her in the offhand way people mention someone they have simply accepted into the story without checking whether the original cast is still on board. I pulled over. I sat in a parking lot outside a dry cleaner for about 12 minutes. Then I called my husband. He answered on the 3rd ring. I asked him, very calmly, whether I was on the guest list for the studio launch. He paused. That pause lasted approximately 2.5 seconds too long. Then he said the party was really just for close collaborators and industry contacts, that it would be awkward to mix personal and professional. That I would find it boring, honestly. That he would take me to dinner afterward to celebrate properly, just the 2 of us. I said that sounded lovely. I hung up. Then I called my attorney. The one I had retained 6 weeks earlier, after I found the second phone in the side pocket of his gym bag while looking for his insurance card. Over the following 2 weeks I learned several things. The woman his mother had mentioned was 23 years old and had been working as his assistant for 14 months. She had moved into an apartment 3 blocks from the studio that my husband had co-signed for in January. He had purchased a car in her name using a draw from the studio's operating account, an account that still carried my name as a secondary guarantor because I had never been asked to remove it, and I had never thought to check. I also learned that the commercial lease on his studio space, a stunning corner unit on the fourth floor of a restored brick building in Capitol Hill, had been negotiated and signed through a property management company, a company called Meridian Collective Holdings. I had founded Meridian Collective Holdings 4 years ago as a vehicle for managing the real estate investments my grandmother's trust had funded. I was the sole managing member. I had signed his lease personally, without looking at the tenant name carefully enough because my office manager had processed the paperwork and I had trusted my own system. My husband had not known he was renting from me. He had been so eager to get the space, so proud of the address, that he had simply signed where his lawyer told him to sign and handed over the first and last month's deposit without reading who was receiving it. I read the lease agreement myself the night after that phone call in the parking lot. Then I read it again. Then I called my attorney and asked her what our options were. She took a long pause. Then she said, "How much time do you need?" The launch party was on a Thursday evening in October. The building's rooftop terrace had been rented separately by my husband through an events company, dressed up with string lights, and catered by a restaurant I had actually recommended to him 2 years ago. There were maybe 60 people up there when the marshals and I arrived. Architects, developers, a few journalists from design publications, the kind of crowd that owns good shoes and talks about negative space, and her, standing close enough to him that the gap between them had its own address. I had filed the commercial fraud affidavit with the county civil court 4 days earlier, based on the forensic accounting report my attorney had commissioned. The report confirmed that my husband had drawn funds from the studio's operating account, an account my money had seeded to pay for the car, the apartment cosign, and 3 separate wire transfers I could not account for. All of it documented, all of it illegal. The writ I was carrying covered the seizure of the studio's primary assets to satisfy the resulting commercial lien. I was also carrying the lease termination notice. My husband crossed the terrace toward me the moment he recovered from the initial shock. He moved fast. His jaw was set in that particular way it got when he was about to be charming and furious at the same time. "What are you doing here?" he said, low, trying to keep it between us. "I'm here on a property matter," I said. "This is a private event." He glanced at the marshals and made a quick, embarrassed gesture, the kind meant to signal to onlookers that everything was under control. "These people are my guests, my clients. You cannot just walk in here." "I can," I said. "And I have the paperwork to explain why." The lead marshal stepped forward, and I handed him the folder. My husband looked at the folder, then he looked at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, not guilt, something more cold, more calculating. "Whatever you think you've found," he said, "you're making a mistake in front of a room full of people I need to respect me." "I know," I said. The marshal opened the folder and addressed the room with the flat, unhurried authority of someone who has done this many times and found no drama in it. "By order of the King County Civil Court, this establishment is subject to a writ of execution. We are here to inventory and seize physical assets to satisfy a commercial lien of $540,000 currently in default. Anyone who interferes with this process will be removed from the premises." The silence on that rooftop was something I will remember for the rest of my life. 60 people in good shoes, not making a sound. Someone's phone buzzed and no one moved to answer it. My husband turned to the room. His instinct kicked in, that deep-wired reflex to perform, to manage the narrative. "This is a domestic dispute being weaponized," he said, loudly enough for the journalist to hear. "My estranged wife has used a legal technicality to disrupt a legitimate business event. The studio is financially solvent. The lien is being contested. None of this reflects the health of the business or the commission." A few people nodded. A few pulled out phones, not to record him, to look things up. I let him finish. "You're right that the studio has a valid commercial lease," I said, once he was done. "A 10-year lease. Very favorable terms." I opened my own folder and removed a single document. "I want to make sure everyone here understands who negotiated those terms." I held up the lease agreement. The header was visible. The management company name was on the first line. "Meridian Collective Holdings," I said. "That's my company. I own the building your studio is in. I have owned it since before you signed the lease. You have been paying rent to me for 3 years. The sound that went through that terrace was not a gasp. It was more like the collective deflation of a held breath. The kind that happens when everyone in a room simultaneously revises their understanding of the story they are in. My husband stared at the document. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Due to documented commercial fraud, including the unauthorized diversion of funds from an account carrying my name as guarantor, your lease is in material breach, I continued. The termination clause is in Section 12, which you initialed on page 7. Effective as of this morning, your lease is terminated. You have until the end of this event to remove your personal belongings from the premises, after which the studio will be secured. One of the men near the bar, older, the kind of investor who wears his watch on the inside of his wrist, set down his drink and quietly picked up his coat. He was the first. He was not the last. My husband spun toward the investors. I watched him do it, watched him understand, in real time, which way the room was tilting. Gentlemen, please. The commission is not affected by this. The Performing Arts Center contract is with the studio entity, not with the building. We can relocate. We have the team, we have the drawings, we have everything we need to deliver. The man with the inside-worn watch looked at my husband for a moment with the expression of someone completing a calculation. You have a $500,000 fraud affidavit and a lease termination, he said quietly. We'll be in touch. He left. His 2 associates followed. My husband stood in the space where they had been standing, and I watched something go out of him. Not all at once, in stages. The way a building settles when something structural shifts, she came up behind him. I had been aware of her the whole time, standing near the catering table, her arms crossed, not speaking. She had that particular stillness of someone deciding whether to stay or run. She put her hand on his arm. He turned. Theo, she said. His name in her mouth was the first time I had ever heard her voice. Is any of this real? Because I called the studio this afternoon, and someone told me the lease was being terminated, and I need you to tell me right now what is actually happening. He looked at her, he said, It's complicated, I can explain. She pulled her hand back. Did you use her money to pay for my car? She asked. He did not answer fast enough. Did you use her money to cosign my apartment? His silence was its own answer. She took a step back, then another. Then she picked up her bag from the chair where she had left it, and she walked to the far end of the terrace, and she pulled out her phone, and she made a call, and I watched her face go through several very private emotions before she turned her back entirely and finished the conversation. She did not come back. He watched her walk away, and something in his posture finally gave. His shoulders dropped, his chin went down. The performance he had been sustaining for 20 minutes collapsed all at once, and what was underneath it was just a man standing on a rooftop in an expensive jacket with no one left to convince. The marshals did their work. The studio's primary assets, the high-end plotters, the custom drafting tables, the servers, the specialty rendering equipment, had been inventoried during business hours the previous day. With a key I had every legal right to provide. The evening seizure was largely procedural. What it was not was quiet. The equipment came down in the freight elevator in full view of the remaining guests, who trickled out in small groups over the following 40 minutes until the terrace was empty, except for catering staff silently wrapping leftover food in plastic. I waited until the last marshal confirmed the asset log was complete. Then I handed my husband the lease termination in person, not through an attorney, not by mail. In person, he took it without looking at me. You planned all of this, he said. Not accusing. Just saying it aloud, like he was still working out the shape of it. I planned all of this, I confirmed. He looked out at the skyline. The lights were doing what city lights do in October, blurring slightly in the cold. I loved you, he said. I know, I said. That's what made it so easy for you. I left him on the rooftop. 2 months later, we were in family court for the divorce. My attorney had submitted the forensic accounting report, the fraud affidavit, and the documentation of the diverted funds as exhibits. His attorney arrived with a bankruptcy filing, arguing that his personal insolvency should discharge the commercial debt. My attorney smiled when they presented it. She had been waiting for that. Under federal bankruptcy code, debt obtained through fraud is non-dischargeable. You cannot file Chapter 7 and walk away from money you stole. The forensic report had established the diversion clearly enough that the judge reviewed it for approximately 4 minutes before setting the filing aside. The divorce was granted in my favor. The commercial debt, the full $540,000 plus accrued interest, survived the bankruptcy. The judge issued a wage garnishment order. A mandatory percentage of every paycheck my husband earned for the foreseeable future would be automatically redirected to my holding company. He was currently working as a junior draftsman at a residential architecture firm in Bellevue. Suburban additions and kitchen remodels, a long way from a performing arts center commission. His mother, who had spent the 2 weeks between the rooftop party and the divorce filing, calling my mother to explain that I had destroyed her son's career out of spite, stopped calling in December. I heard through a mutual contact that she had quietly asked my husband to reimburse her for the cost of the dress she had bought for the launch party, the party she had told me about by accident. He could not. She had not spoken to him since Tess, his assistant, the 23-year-old with the cosigned apartment and the car registered in her name, had moved out of the Capitol Hill unit within 2 weeks of the rooftop. The apartment was now rented to a graphic designer and her roommate. I know because Meridian Collective Holdings received the new lease application. My office manager processed it. I signed the approval without reading the tenant name, and then I looked it up afterward, and I sat with that for a minute, and then I moved on. 18 months after that October night, I walked back into the building on Capitol Hill. The corner unit on the 4th floor had been vacant for 11 months while I figured out what I wanted to do with it. My attorney had suggested subletting. My financial advisor had suggested commercial conversion. My mother had suggested I sell it and never think about it again. I did none of those things. I redesigned it. Not by myself. I hired a small firm, 2 women who had left a larger practice to build something of their own. They were exactly the kind of architects my husband had always said he wanted to be before the money and the ego got between him and the work. They listened more than they talked in our first meeting, and by the end of it I trusted them completely. The Performing Arts Center Commission, the one that had been the centerpiece of his launch party, had been transferred to a different studio after his dissolved. The project lead was a woman I had met once at a city planning meeting. She sent me a note when the building broke ground. I went to the groundbreaking. I stood in the back. I did not tell anyone who I was. What I built in that corner unit was a co-working studio specifically designed for women in the creative industries, architects, designers, urban planners, illustrators, affordable memberships on a sliding scale, a lending library of professional software licenses, a small gallery wall near the entrance that rotated monthly showing work by members. No pitch decks, no investor nights, just space and light and the particular kind of quiet that lets you think. Within the first year, we had a wait list. Within the second year, the rental income from the studio, combined with the garnishment deposits that arrived on the 1st and 15th of every month without fail, had returned more than a third of my initial investment. I did not celebrate that with champagne. I took my mother to dinner at a restaurant she had always wanted to try, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a bread course, and I ordered whatever I wanted, and I listened to her talk about her garden, and I did not check my phone once. On the way home, she asked me if I was okay. I told her I was better than okay. She reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "Your grandmother would be very pleased. I think she would have been." Not because I won. She was never particularly interested in winning. But because I read every page of every document before I signed it, because I kept the receipts, because when someone tried to take what she had spent 40 years building for me, I did not cry about it in a parking lot. I made a plan. I am not telling you this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I never needed that. I'm telling you because there is a version of this story where I paid the bills and signed the papers and smiled at the party I was not invited to and quietly disappeared from the business I had funded. And there is another version, this one, where I read the fine print, secured my interests, and walked back in through my own front door. Always know whose name is on the lease. Always know what you are guaranteeing, and never ever let someone convince you that understanding your own finances is somehow unromantic. That is not love, that is leverage, and it only works in their direction if you let it.